morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today for this very important announcement. And I'm glad we're here at the Chelsea Recreation Center. It is the perfect setting for us to talk about a fundamental human right. For many of us, going to the gym is an established part of our routine. One of those things we do almost without thinking about it. It's certainly a part of my routine. But just imagine what the experience of going to the gym would be like if you didn't feel comfortable using the bathroom. It would put all kinds of restraints on the timing of your workout and drinking water to stay hydrated. And what if you needed to wash your hands or wanted to splash some cold water on your face? None of that would be possible. And so you would probably go to the gym less frequently, or maybe not at all. Transgender and gender nonconforming New Yorkers don't have to imagine what that would be like. Every day, no matter where they go, they are burdened with worry that when they need the certainty of privacy for personal needs, it will not be there for them. And that is just wrong. As honorary chair of the Commission on Gender Equity, I am proud to be part of a team that is working hard to create a future where New Yorkers have the fundamental freedoms they need to be their true selves. And I am pleased to note that Azi Khalili, our new executive director of the Commission, is here with us today for this news. I'm pleased that she is here for this news, which is so perfectly aligned with the Commission's founding vision to address bias and inequality. At this very moment, Americans are being bombarded with communications that go against everything New Yorkers stand for, with speeches and commercials coded to incite fear and exclusion. Well, that kind of language and that type of attitude doesn't cut it in New York City. New Yorkers know that to safeguard our individual rights, we must stand up for the rights of others, and we will.
Amen.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce someone who has been a passionate supporter of LGBTQ rights and the LGBTQ community since before I even knew him. And he's not a supporter with only his words. He is a supporter who takes action, as you were about to see. It is my great pleasure to introduce Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Well, I want to thank Charlene, not just for what she said in her remarks, and not just for what she's done as First Lady, but for decades upon decades of activism on behalf of human rights and civil rights. I can say one thing about my wife. Very early on, even going back to high school, she did not take well to discrimination against anyone. And she stood up and she fought for the rights of everyone. Let's thank her for all she does. So yes, Charlene's right. We should be talking about New York values. New York values are needed right now. New York values are important right now in this discourse we're having all around the country. Charlene's right. Somehow hate is making a comeback, and we're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to stand up to hate. We're going to talk about the fact that the greatest city in the country is also the most diverse and the most inclusive, the most tolerant, the most understanding, the most embracing. Those are New York values, and those values work, my friends. There's a reason this city is admired all over the world. There's a reason that so many good things happen here, because it's a place for everyone. And we have to stand up for those values. We have to spread those values. They're needed more now than ever. So let's talk about the history of this place. Here, we respect the rights of all. We respect the rights of all New Yorkers, regardless of religion or immigration status or sexual orientation. We think an attack on one is an attack on the rest of us. We think defending the rights of one community is defending the rights of all communities. That's why we have one of the nation's strongest human rights laws, and it's made us a beacon for people who believe in tolerance and understanding. We are proud. We are the proud home of 25,000 transgender and gender nonconforming New Yorkers. They are part of the fabric of life in this city, and we honor them and we embrace them, and we believe in them. Now, as Charlene said, I'm proud to have some real history on issues of fighting for human rights. I was in the City Council, chair of the General Welfare Committee, and our committee years ago passed a bill that was profoundly important, prohibiting discrimination against transgender New Yorkers. Well before it was in vogue in other parts of the country, this city prohibited discrimination. And that's something that we needed to do to send a message all over the city of the kind of place that we needed to be. Now, it's important that those ideas are backed up in every way, particularly when it comes to our public places and particularly when it comes to all of the buildings that are owned by the people, meaning owned by the City of New York. Let's face it, for too long, and Charlene described it powerfully, too many transgender and gender nonconforming New Yorkers have been harassed. They've been made to feel out of place and uncomfortable. They've been asked to show ID in a demeaning way. And you can imagine what that must feel like. Too many people have been looked at with suspicion. And that doesn't help them to feel a sense of belonging or to fulfill their God-given potential. Today, you're going to hear from two courageous activists who will share their stories. Sean Coleman from Destination Tomorrow and Biane Garcia from Make the Road New York. And for them who have been fighting for these basic rights and for the entire transgender and gender nonconforming community, we're here today to take another step forward. Through an executive order, we're ensuring that transgender and gender nonconforming New Yorkers can use single-sex public restrooms and other facilities in city government buildings and areas consistent with their gender identity, period. That's important, period. This executive order required the law to be posted clearly for the public and for city employees to see. I want to emphasize we have 350,000 employees of the City of New York. And one of the most important things that this executive order does is it sends a very clear message to all our employees that this is how things should be done. There will be extensive training for city employees because there are people, those who work for the city, are supposed to be in the lead of enforcing our laws, and we want everyone who works for the city to understand these laws and stand up for their fellow New Yorkers. So we'll make sure that training is there, and our Commission on Human Rights will play a key role working with city agencies to ensure compliance. It's important at this time to remind all New Yorkers that any New Yorker who encounters discrimination of any kind should call 311 and get connected to the Human Rights Commission, which does such important work fighting discrimination every single day. And you're going to hear from the chair of the Human Rights Commission in just a moment. She's going to talk about the crucial work the commission does. But I also want to thank members of my administration who are here today. My counsel, Maya Wiley, who's been in the forefront of this work. Thank you, Maya. Commissioner for the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, Lizette Camillo. Thank you. Commissioner for the Administration for Children's Services, Gladys Carrion. Thank you. First Deputy Commissioner at Department of Parks, Liam Kavanaugh, thank you. Chief Technology Officer, Minerva Tantoko, thank you. And I want to thank Ozzie Khalili, the new Executive Director of the Commission on Gender Equity. Welcome. and also to all the members who are here from the Commission on Gender Equity and all the Human Rights Commission commissioners who are here and all the advocates and organizations. A lot of people work for years for changes like this, and it's a day like this when they need to be remembered and appreciated. So for all the advocates, let's give them a big round of applause right now. One more acknowledgement, special thank you to Dan Tietz of HRA. Thank you very much, Dan, for being here as well. Now, the work of fighting discrimination, the work of extending civil and human rights, that's an everyday thing. That never goes away. This city is the birthplace of the LGBT rights movement. We're proud of that fact. We're literally the birthplace where it all began at Stonewall. And yet, that work doesn't have an end point, and we should be comfortable with that. This is part of human reality. The work of ensuring greater equality is an everyday thing. That's why the founders of this nation talked about creating a more perfect union. They didn't say there was an end point. This is work we keep doing, and we're proud to keep doing it. And we never rest on our laurels so long as anyone is being discriminated against. You know, all over this country, we see a very negative current, and it's our job to take it on. All over the country, we are seeing more and more legislation being introduced that aims to take people backwards, to separate, to divide. Just over the last few weeks, more than 175 175 anti-LGBT bills have been introduced in over 30 states. I want to repeat that, because it has everything to do with the discussion that's going on in this country right now. A country that, to the great credit of people all over this country who demanded, for example, marriage equality, who have demanded a more inclusive and tolerant nation. At the same time, there are those who seek to set us back. 175 anti-LGBT rights bills have been introduced in over 30 states just this year. That's the stakes we're dealing with right now. And that's why it's so important to keep standing up stronger than ever, to show that no New Yorker, no American should ever be discriminated against. We are going to take this step today to show once again that New York is a beacon, a place where everyone can live in dignity. And it works because everyone lives in dignity. That's what we believe in here. And in that same spirit, I want to say it in Spanish. En Nueva York, respetamos los derechos de todos. No importa su religión, estatus migratorio, orientación sexual o identidad de género. Y no toleramos la discriminación en ningún lugar de nuestra ciudad. Por eso hoy me complace firmar una orden ejecutiva para que las personas transexuales y con disconformidad de género puedan usar los baños públicos de acuerdo con su identidad. It sounds good in all languages, giving people their rights. We've had strong voices in the City Council standing up for human and civil rights, and particularly for the rights of transgender New Yorkers. I'd first like to introduce Councilmember Corey Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome to Chelsea. It's a good morning to be on West 25th Street. This building that we're in actually was built after 40 years of community activism. It started under John Lindsay's administration, and it took a long time to get here today. And Chelsea, I think, has been a beacon across the city as a welcoming, affirmative, and inclusive neighborhood. I'm really excited to be here today. This administration, and especially our wonderful commissioner, have done an enormous amount of work on ensuring that transgender New Yorkers and LGBT New Yorkers are protected. Previous administrations, and it hasn't really been reported that much, almost nearly defunded the Commission on Human Rights. They were hollowed out. And this administration, in partnership with the City Council, in the last two budget cycles, have actually been able to get them back up to speed so they could hire attorneys and investigators to do this very important work that we know persists across New York City. And the folks that are most targeted are the most vulnerable. I want to thank the mayor because about a little more than a year ago, he was very early to support a bill that I authored and passed nearly unanimously and was signed by him very quickly to allow transgender New Yorkers to get accurate birth certificates in New York City. And the mayor was a very early supporter of that. He talked about his time as general welfare chair. We're seeing now over the past week an announcement that LGBT New Yorkers will be able to finally march in the St. Patrick's Day parade in just a couple of weeks. And so he has been a consistent champion and advocate and ally to this community. But I also want to say, and he mentioned it, the fight is not over. There has been an epidemic of violence against transgender New Yorkers in New York City for the past many years. Trans women are being murdered in New York City. And it is not just unsafe for New Yorkers to come and use a bathroom of their choice. On our streets, we see people being targeted. So there is still an enormous amount of work to do. And after we saw marriage equality passed and affirmed by the Supreme Court, we've seen an enormous backlash. The city of Houston didn't pass a measure to protect transgender New Yorkers. The governor of South Dakota just vetoed a measure last week that was going to target transgender young people. North Carolina, the governor said last week he wants to sign an anti-transgender measure statewide having to do with bathrooms. Transgender people have actually become more of a target as the LGBT community has succeeded. And in New York City, this mayor, this administration, this commissioner, and the city council have said, we are not going back. We are going to step up and continue to protect transgender, gender nonconforming New Yorkers in the best way possible, under the force of law, with a commission, with a commissioner, with lawyers, and with folks to say enough is enough. This is a community that has seen higher rates of poverty, higher rates of unemployment, higher rates of discrimination, higher rates of violence, and it is now time in 2016 to have New York City be the beacon that reverses the trend nationally and protects all New Yorkers, regardless of who they are. And so I am very grateful to be here today. Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for consistent help and support of the transgender community.
Thank you. And now a long-standing champion for the rights of all New Yorkers, and she comes from a district that has a very, very proud history of standing up for change and being one of the places in this city we look to for that progressive impulse. I'd like to introduce Councilmember Rosie Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I and the LGBT caucus would like to thank you and the Commission on Human Rights, the Executive Director Khalili, for this measure. Today, you strengthen LGBTQ and gender nonconforming rights by signing this executive order. You know, all too often, even in this great city, individuals are harassed, are beaten, and sometimes even arrested for trying to go about normal activities like using transgender and gender non. Today, the city taking this step, we're going one step further to ensure the rights of all in this city. Corey spoke very eloquently, so I don't think I need to repeat. Everybody here has known or seen someone. The only thing I want to add to what Corey said is, more often than not, it is not just transgender women, it is transgender women of color who are being beaten and killed, and not just in New York City, but in this country. And at least here in this city, we're taking affirmative steps to say that that is not something we support, and we are going to support the rights of all and strengthen the rights of our community. Le quiero dar las gracias al alcalde y la comisionada del Derecho Humano para esta legislación ejecutiva que va enforzar y apoyar los derechos de la comunidad LGBT, transgénero, aquí en la ciudad de Nueva York. Muchas veces en esta ciudad, individuos que quieren usar algo como un baño, tiene agresión y a veces son arrestados por la policía aquí para hacer sus necesidades. Esta legislación hoy es el primer paso para asegurar los derechos de nuestra comunidad. Muchas gracias.
Well, what Councilman Johnson said about the Human Rights Commission is true. For most of 20 years, the Human Rights Commission was really sliding backwards and wasn't playing the active role it needed to in our city's life. We came in with the belief that that had to change, and we needed a dynamic leader to change it. And Carmelyn Malalas has done that in all ways. She has taken the commission and brought it back to a strong, aggressive, assertive place, and she's helping to protect the rights of New Yorkers who have too long been ignored. So it's my honor to introduce the chair of the Human Rights Commission, Carmelyn Malalas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as many of you know, issues of equity and equality, especially in this area, in the area of LGBTQ rights, are near and dear to my heart. I know that as a lesbian of color, my trans brothers and sisters, their amazing work has really benefited me in my life, in movements for racial justice, for gender equity, for LGBTQ rights, for women's rights. And I am so happy to be standing here today as a part of this city government supporting you. So thank you. In my prior career representing people who had been discriminated against in the workplace, I saw firsthand how our transgender and gender nonconforming brothers and sisters were often subjected to some of the most cruel and contemptible forms of discrimination at work. And some of these cases were some of the most disturbing because of the simple courtesies that were denied them. Things like being addressed by their chosen name, being able to use the restroom associated with their gender identity or gender expression. Too often, employers stayed silent, did not set the tone for inclusion in the workplace. There were, however, some employers who refused to stay silent when they saw transgender and gender nonconforming people being unwelcome or unsafe. And I am so very proud to say that's the case with my employer, the City of New York. Today, the executive order will make loud and clear that New York City is a city for us all, cisgender, transgender, non-binary, irrespective of gender, gender identity, or gender expression. Today, Mayor de Blasio raises up that welcome sign high with pride and inclusion. I am so gratified to be a part of this administration on this historic day. So proud to be a part of the team that makes sure my transgender and gender nonconforming brothers and sisters get the respect and dignity and the bathrooms, locker rooms, spas, and other single-sex facilities they deserve. So thank you, Mayor de Blasio. Now, there are a lot of folks who have been in this for the long haul. There have been a lot of folks who have contributed to the rights for LGBT equality for folks who are living in the peril. And I want to make sure that we identify some of the human rights commissioners who are here. I know that Arnie Segar is here, who's one of the commissioners for human rights. Reverend C.B. Stewart, who's one of the commissioners for the Commission on Gender Equity. And while I think this has really been a community effort, there are folks also from our community advocacy groups who have really supported the commission in trying to make this happen and making today a reality. So I want to give it up to Glenda Testone and Carrie Davis at the LGBT Center. Maura Kiesling from the National Center for Transgender Equality could not be here today, but she also sends her best and was really integral in this. Emily Hecht McGowan from the Family Equality Council. And Chase Strangio from the ACLU LGBT Rights Project. Thank you again, Nick.
Thank you very much, Carmelyn. And now, as I mentioned, I want you to hear from two folks who have really been at the forefront, who have worked hard to protect the rights of so many, and their stories really put today in perspective. First of all, she's been a justice organizer at Make the Road, New York, and her life and work are proof that transgender New Yorkers are contributing so much to our city. It's my honor to introduce Vianney Garcia. You're tall now. There you go.
Hello, good morning. My speech is going to be on Spanish, and Natalia is going to help me to translate. Mi nombre es Vianney García. Emigré a los Estados Unidos a la edad de 15 años, escapando de la transfobia que se vive en mi país natal, México. Como mujer translatina, comencé a participar en la lucha contra la discriminación y la protección de los miembros de la comunidad a la edad de 19 años. Hace 5 años me convertí organizadora del proyecto LGBT en Se Hace Camino en Nueva York para defender los derechos de mi comunidad LGBTQ.
Hi, my name is Vianney Garcia. I came to the United States at the age of 15 to escape transphobia back in Mexico. As a trans Latina woman and LGBTQ organizer with Make the Road New York, I work to combat discrimination and to protect my community.
Hace algunos años atrás, se me prohibió el uso usar el baño de mujeres en un restaurante en Jackson Heights por parte del propio dueño. En ese día me sentí humillada, pero al igual que le ha pasado a muchas y muchos de nosotros, de miembros de la comunidad, ni siquiera se me pasó por la cabeza hacer una denuncia o una queja o avisarle a nadie debido al miedo y la frustración que se vive en la comunidad. Poder usar el baño de mujeres es mi derecho porque me identifico como una mujer y es el derecho que me pertenece como ser humano.
A few years ago, I was prohibited from using the ladies' bathroom at a restaurant by its owner. That day, I felt humiliated. But like so many others, I didn't think of making a complaint or telling anyone because of fear, frustration, and disbelief. Access to ladies' bathroom is my right as a trans woman, as a human being. Too many members of our community do not have the tools and information they so desperately need to win justice, and we all must keep working for them.
Muchos miembros de la comunidad no tienen la información y las herramientas que necesitamos específicamente, desesperadamente, para denunciar actos de discriminación y obtener la justicia, por lo que todos debemos seguir trabajando para proporcionar a ellos valiosos recursos. La ciudad de Nueva York es la capital del mundo. Lo que sucede aquí es un ejemplo para todos los otros estados y también en el mundo entero. Por eso es que el día de hoy es tan importante para todos. Quiero agradecer al alcalde Blasio por su visión al futuro al firmar esta orden ejecutiva.
What happens in New York City sets an example for the rest of the country and the world. That's why today is so important, and I thank you, Mayor Bill de Blasio, for this forward thinking in this executive order.
I'm going to share my leadership mantra. Como organizadora de la comunidad LGBT, yo no elegí ser una activista. La injusticia me empujó. Días como hoy me hace sentir aún más inspirada y capaz para ayudar a otros a obtener la ayuda, la información, los servicios necesarios para poder seguir adelante con sus vidas sobre la discriminación que contribuyendo al bienestar de nuestra gran ciudad.
It is a big and courageous step in our ongoing fight to provide trans and gender nonconforming people with the opportunity to be secure in themselves and to feel safe from violence and harassment when using a bathroom or a locker room. A day like today makes me feel even more inspired and empowered to help my community get the information they need and thrive and contribute to the well-being of our great city.
Thank you.
Now it's my honor to introduce Sean Coleman, Executive Director of Destination Tomorrow, a grassroots LGBT organization in the South Bronx. Welcome, Sean.
Good morning. I want to thank you for allowing me a moment to speak on what is a dream realized for many in the transgender community. As someone who knows firsthand the anxiety associated with something as simple as using a public restroom, I applaud Mayor de Blasio. This executive order will ensure that no transgender New Yorker will ever suffer through the pain of attempting to wait for a safe place to relieve themselves. As someone who at one point would not stay outside for more than 4 hours for fear of not having access to public accommodations should they be needed, I understand the impact of this executive order. Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for being a true friend and an ally to the trans community. At Destination Tomorrow, we're working tirelessly to ensure that all transgender New Yorkers have access to a livable wage, affordable, safe housing, and that our transgender sisters are safe from violence. I look forward to a continued partnership with this administration on behalf of the transgender community as New York continues to set the tone for human rights for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both for all the wonderful work you've done. Now, I need to just engage in a moment of democratic process here. How many people believe it's time for me to sign this executive order? I can't hear you. There you go. Okay. Now, a desk is supposed to appear somewhere. It is appearing over there. Okay. There we go.
Stills down, please. Fist pump down, please, in the front. Please, sir, kneel down. Same shot.
Hi, how are you? I want to, yeah, that's what I kind of want. Thank you.
We're going to switch gears to on-topic Q&A.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. Sure, by the podium? Oh, yeah. You ready?
Okay, let's gather members of my administration so we can do the on-topic followed by off-topic questions. Members of my administration gather around. All right, everyone, come on, gather closer. Liam, come on over. Carmelin is here, Maya's here. All right, everyone, spread out. There we go. Okay, first we're going to take questions on this topic. Then we will take questions on general topics. Hold on. Trying to find the water in here. I found the water. Technical difficulties. Okay, on the topic of today's announcement, Mara.
I'm sorry if I missed this in the release, but Mr. Mayor, how many bathrooms are there?
How many bathrooms are there? Wow, that is a good question. Okay, we're going to open this one up. Who from the city knows? Lizette Camillo knows. DCAS knows everything.
DCAS, yes. Of the 55 buildings that the Department of Citywide Administrative Services manages and cleans, there are about 22,000.
Be under this program? Or?
Yes. I'm sorry, 2,200, over 2,200.
2,200 in city buildings.
In DCAS managed buildings, which is 55 buildings.
2,200
of the 55.
How many total bathrooms will be available?
Don't know about that, the number of bathrooms, but there are over 4,000 bathrooms.
Now, we need to, you're asking every place how much does it cover, not just the DCAS-run building. So we need a bigger answer, and we will get you that answer, unless anyone knows right off the top. Do you know, Carmel?
Sure. So the executive order applies to all buildings and facilities that are owned or operated by the city. Now, there are certain city institutions like the DOE that already has a chancellor's guideline that's consistent with the executive order. And then other city institutions like CUNY, the Health and Hospitals Corporation, what's another one I'm trying to think? NYCHA, that they are not technically under, the jurisdiction of executive orders, but they have already committed to implementing the policy in the executive order, and the Commission and DCAS will be working with them to do that.
Okay. Laura.
It says here that city agencies must comply with the order immediately or seek an exemption of certain provisions of the executive order through a request.
Okay.
What are the circumstances under which someone would seek an exemption, and what would be the circumstances under which you would grant it? Can you say a little more about that?
So the exemption applies to an existing provision under the city human rights law. Exemptions are available in the context of, if there is a gender-based exemption needed or an age-based exemption that's needed. And the language of the statute speaks to if it is in the, to strengthen public policy. So sometimes that could be for safety reasons or other reasons. So we wanted to make sure the executive order was consistent with what we already have under the city human rights law.
I don't understand that. What does that mean, that a city agency can opt out of complying in some way, or what are you?
No, so I'm gonna step back for a moment and say, so the executive order goes into effect immediately, which basically means, if you look at the executive order, that within 3 months, all agencies that are under the executive order must post the policy of the executive order in conspicuous places. Within 1 year, all managerial staff should be trained in gender diversity and inclusion. Within 2 years, all frontline staff, and then that repeats every 2 years. Now, for very narrow circumstances under the city human rights law, the city human rights law allows for entities, and it's not just in the city system, it's whoever is subject to the city human rights law in the city, allows for exemptions for folks to apply for those if they can show that there is truly a public policy need for an exemption based on gender or age. So it's not specific to this executive order, it's just making it on par with what is already existing under the city human rights law.
I think the important thing to note here is it must be requested, and only if the commission grants the request will you be exempt. That will happen in very rare circumstances. That's the real bottom line, is it will be very, very rare, because it will rarely be in the policy interests of the city to exempt an agency from this executive order.
Hey, wait a minute. We don't do too many backs and forths. This is the last one. Go ahead.
It's still very
Go ahead.
abstract, obviously. Is there an example? Can you think of an example under which?
So it's hard to be abstract because we haven't had an agency formally apply. But I would say, if you think of our prison system, our corrections department obviously is covered by this executive order. So yeah, it's possible that there may be a security interest in securing certain bathrooms purely from a safety standpoint that may, we don't know, but may merit an exemption. But again, they'd have to demonstrate that there was a sufficient safety issue to merit the exemption.
Mr. Mayor, what is the current situation in the schools regarding this issue, and how does this executive order change things in the schools?
So just a
bathrooms and facilities. What facilities are we talking about?
Locker rooms, for example, is one. Locker rooms are an example of something separate from simply a narrow bathroom. But let me start, and then Carmelin or Maya may want to add. Again, there's the human rights laws that have existed, and different agencies have taken some of their own actions. We wanted something that was both unifying across agencies and made very clear to our employees in particular that this was something that had to be implemented, and we would do the training to go with it. So this is about making sure this really is implemented on the ground effectively. But do you want to speak to schools in particular?
So with schools, to elaborate on that, the Department of Education already has a chancellor's guideline that is explicit in this area that basically directs that schools should allow transgender and gender nonconforming students to be able to use facilities consistent with their gender identity. So it works, very, very comfortably with that existing guideline because it's consistent.
change things in schools?
Well, one of the things I think that it adds, it probably complements it, in that I think a very important part of the executive order is the policy, but another very important part of the executive order is the training, right? We want to make sure that managerial and frontline staff have the training, and that's one of the reasons that the commission has worked very closely with DCAS to make sure, as part of the mandatory training that agencies undergo, this is part of that curriculum.
We don't want people discriminated against, and the fact is that having a broad policy is one thing, but making sure it sticks is another thing. So really making sure that all of the folks who work for the city of New York understand how important it is to respect people's rights and not put them in very degrading and humiliating circumstances. And that's what you heard from some of the folks who spoke before, that's what they've been put through throughout much of their lives, and we've got to end that. So this is about a single unified policy with the training to go with it to really change what happens on the ground.
So, Mr. Mayor, does this then also allow for non-gender specific bathrooms, or is that already an okay policy? Or
Sure. So again, I think this is probably something that very complements. Like, there are different ways, I think, that folks have been trying to be supportive of gender nonconforming and transgender communities, and one of them is to create, gender neutral spaces. And so this works very nicely with this. This was really in recognition for the fact that there are many places that do not have, single stall gender neutral facilities that could be converted to a gender neutral space. And so there is the recognition that a lot of the facilities are actually, single sex but multi-user. So we wanted to make sure that, even in instances where, there may be agencies, or if you're looking at Greater New York, that there are facilities that are gender neutral, single stall, that folks who don't have those arrangements, that we also have welcoming environments for transgender and gender nonconforming people, even if there aren't those gender neutral spaces.
So is this enforced then based on a complaint?
Well, let's be clear. First of all, the training and the policies across the board. The point about people calling 311 if they feel discriminated against is if anyone feels that the policy was not followed, we want them to let us know so we can do something about it. So look, I believe the vast majority of people hearing that this is the rule will respect this rule and will work with their fellow New Yorkers. But some people may not get the memo right away, and that's why it's important to have enforcement capacity. It's important to have a strong Human Rights Commission, and we welcome any concerns that people have that they call 311 with them. Yes.
Do you guys have an estimated cost for this in terms of the signage that you have to put up?
It's pretty minimal.
Well, I was going to say, the beauty also about taking this approach is there's no cost. Signage doesn't change. What changes is that people have to allow people to use the bathrooms. If there's a sign that says women's restroom, then all women, including transgender women, need to be able to use that restroom. If there's signage that says, this is the men's restroom, that means that transgender men need to be using that, should be allowed to use that restroom. So there's no cost because the signage doesn't change under this schema.
I guess I would ask, for average New Yorkers, they might not really know that this is a thing even, and they would go about their lives in the same exact way. So I'm just wondering, are you guys going to plan any sort of campaign to tell people that this is what's happening?
So first, let me go back to your first question to clarify that the training we're going to do of city workers is something we do on an ongoing basis for many, many reasons. Agencies are constantly retraining their workers on any number of things, so this will be folded into that, so that's not a separate expense. We're certainly going to do a lot to publicize it. We don't have a specific campaign yet, but we're going to do a lot to publicize, and that's what we're doing today, too, to let people know and make sure that folks know if they feel they are being discriminated against, they have the option of calling 311 so we can do something about it. Emily.
Conversations that we've had with private businesses like restaurants, department stores, places that we think coffee. I mean, if you're a New Yorker out and about, it's hard to find a back and whatever.
Sure. Sure. So again, this is separate from the executive order because the executive order deals specifically with city agencies and buildings, facilities owned and operated by the city. In December, the Commission on Human Rights published its legal enforcement guidelines or guidance in the area of gender identity and gender expression discrimination. And restroom use, single-sex facility use was one of the examples given as ways that, whether you're looking at housing providers, businesses, employers, one of these areas that we wanted to make very transparent how people should be thinking of discrimination against transgender people, how it manifests itself in these different areas. As part of releasing that guidance, we've been putting out a lot more information. We've been having a lot more conversations actually with different business organizations or business institutions. We're going to continue doing that. One of the reasons that we put out guidance specifically in this area, something I note is that the two other guidance we had put out last year, we put out guidance on new provisions of the law. Here, we didn't put out guidance because it was a new provision of the law, because gender identity and gender expression discrimination has been prohibited under the city human rights law since 2002. We put it in this area because there were just a lot of questions. It was, in fact, to respond to the many questions we received from individuals and from businesses, and how it manifests itself, and how folks can be more inclusive environments, how they can protect their rights, et cetera.
Okay. Yep.
I don't understand how the situation with private businesses. Is it legal for a restaurant or other private business to deny access to a bathroom? What is the situation?
So under the city human rights law, yes, it could be considered a violation of the city human rights law if a restaurant or any sort of business for that matter was denying a restroom to somebody that was consistent with that person's gender identity or gender expression.
Somebody, you can't use the bathroom.
It could be considered a violation of the city human rights law, yes.
And again, that's the same kind of thing I want to keep emphasizing. I'm always asking you guys to include the news you can use in your news, that if anyone has that experience and feels in a private setting that they have been denied access to a bathroom that they deserve to use, we want them to call 311 and report it. Yeah.
Question on the total projected cost. Do you have a sense of what that fee will be? And also, could you talk about what the training will entail? Do you have specifics on that?
Well, just again, we see very minimal, if any, costs because the announcements, as Carmelin said, are already up, and the training is happening anyway on a variety of levels for agencies. So really very, very little of any meaningful cost. What was the second question?
On the training, could you provide us with some specifics on what it will entail?
Do we have all of that yet, or is that something still has to be worked out? Is that?
So DCAS administers the trainings for all employees, and we've already have a number of LGBT modules. We're expanding. We're working with the Commission of Human Rights to incorporate those specifics.
Okay. Jillian.
You pointed out earlier that many cities or towns are going in the opposite direction, passing these bathroom bills that have been in the news so often. I'm just wondering if you think that doing this in New York, you're hoping that other cities will sort of follow the lead.
Look, and by the way, those bills that I mentioned are not just about the right to use a bathroom or a locker room. A lot of them are trying to take away other rights as well. I think New York City has an obligation to lead. I think we have an obligation to show that everyone should be embraced and everyone should be respected. And look, I think in a dramatic moment like the one we're going through in our country, change comes from the grassroots. Change comes from the ground. And if people who believe in human rights don't stand up for them, it lets those negative voices dominate. So we're certainly not going to let that happen. As I said, we have very clear New York values, and we're going to stand up for them. Okay, last call on this topic before we do, we're doing media questions only. Last call on this topic, please.
So, Mr. Mayor, the school situation, are there specific kids who are allowed to go, say, into the boys' room or the girls' room because they have declared a different gender identity, or can anybody use the boys' room and the girls' room? I could imagine there could be chaos.
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I think this is clearly about people expressing their identity. I think ultimately it's a matter of common sense, respect for the identity that people declare. But you can speak to either one of you. Want to speak to that more?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, this is not about singling people out. In fact, it's about the reverse of that. It's about making sure that people who have a certain identity, that they're able to use whatever facility they are without somebody policing them, without somebody having to ask for their identification or having them to, you know, raise their hand and identify themselves that way.
Right. And Rich, what I'd say is just think about the reality, and you heard from some of the folks who spoke. Think about the reality of having a clear sense of identity and then being denied access to the place you need to be and being shamed and excluded. I mean, that's what we have to get at here, and that's what we have to change. And we want people to know that they can go about their lives and not be excluded. That's why this is so important. Did you have?
Right. The level of maturity in the high school. I'm just saying that, you know what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, but let me say this. So, of course, again, we understand that the folks who work in our schools, you know, they are experts on young people, obviously, by the nature of their work, and they know how to communicate with them. But what we don't want is a situation where someone knows what their identity is and then can't go to the facilities that they need to go to, and imagine the conflicts that causes. Imagine the anger, the frustration, imagine all the problems of someone being sent to the place that they don't believe is the right place for them. So I think our school personnel will be able to work with our young people. I think they understand our young people. But this is about affirming the right for someone to follow through on their own identity.
I think one point that should not be lost here that Commissioner Malala stated is that there has already been a Department of Education chancellor's rule on this. This has been in place for a couple of years. We are not seeing a situation in which there are huge problems because the Department of Education has chosen to honor the identity of any of its students. So the fact that this is not brand new in the Department of Education should give parents and students a lot of confidence that this is actually going to promote human rights and dignity, not problems and turmoil.
Amen. Okay. Thank you, Maya. Let's do some other topics. Anna.
As you know, there was an aerial survey of deer on Staten Island a couple weeks ago, so I just wanted to get an update from you when you think the city will put out a plan for Staten Island's deer population, and if you agree with the borough president that some deer are going to have to die in order to manage that population.
I believe it's a very serious issue, and I know it matters a lot to the people of Staten Island. I know there's real safety issues involved as well. I don't want to presume how we handle it yet until we finish the work of assessing the situation. As you know, we have to work with state and federal partners on this. So we are focused on it. We will have more to say very shortly, but I don't want to prejudge until we've analyzed what's been found. Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, in the last few weeks, there have been a number of instances or incidents where people with emotional or psychological problems have acted out. Most recently, yesterday, in Queens, where a man who had a history of psychological problems and was not on his medication stabbed somebody to death to, you know, set people on fire. I wonder if you could share your thoughts and concerns about illness and public danger, and what steps, if any, that can be taken.
We have to do things very differently. We really have to do things differently. For decades, mental health problems have been stigmatized, have gone untreated, and the response of government on all levels was simply to tolerate that. We need to do a much better job, again, city government, state government, federal government, all of us, at identifying when someone has a problem and getting them the help they need. Now, the Thrive NYC program that my wife has led is focused on reaching children early, identifying problems, connecting them to mental health, keeping them connected to mental health. And then the initiative we've put together that focuses more on folks with any history of violence, the Hub, which is about finding people who have serious mental illness problems and have been identified as folks who need ongoing treatment and also have a history of violence. That is an area where we have to do a lot more person by person, family by family, and that's why the Hub was set up, to literally create a specific plan for each person. This horrible tragedy over the weekend is not only very painful, but also very complex because the individual had no history of significant violence. There were some minor criminal offenses, but not involving violence. And we don't have all the details yet, but from what we know, this is not someone who would have come up on the radar as a particular threat. But this does get to the point that that family deserved more help to figure out how to handle the problems that that young man was having. And that is why, first, we have to destigmatize mental health problems. Second, we have to make treatment available very widely and very easily. That's why we have a new plan called NYC Support, where any New Yorker will be able to call 311, get connected to care on a regular basis, not just one shot, but connected to care and being able to stay connected to care. But this stuff is complicated. The difference now is, I can say on behalf of this city, we're going to take it on head on. We know it's not going to change overnight. We know this. And anyone who wants an overnight solution has to look at the fact that this was bluntly ignored for decades. But we are going to go at this problem head on.
I think it's complicated by the fact that the state for years have had a policy of deinstitutionalization.
Yes, of course. Because, Marcia, I think it's a very, very good question. If instead of deinstitutionalization the way it happened, which we had institutions for people with mental health problems that were really horrible. They were substandard and they were dangerous. And at the time, the theory was, well, people would be brought to a better location, a quote-unquote halfway house or some kind of other community-based location. Well, guess what? They weren't. They weren't given the support they needed. There wasn't funding for those halfway houses and those community locations. And so what happened is people were left to their own devices. Many families didn't know how to handle the problems that their family members had. It was the origins of the modern homelessness problem, unquestionably. And when you add it up, we had a chance in the 1970s and 80s to stop what has now become a very dangerous pattern of lots of people disconnected from mental health and in too many cases violent as well. That's when we could have gotten on the right path. That opportunity was missed decades ago. Now we have to put it all back together again. But it's going to take real investment in mental health, a very preventative attitude to reaching people as soon as we see signs of a problem. It's going to take a lot of destigmatization. It's going to take a lot of resources. But I'll tell you one thing. The First Lady's plan is about $850 million over 4 years. It's going to be some of the best money we've ever spent because it's going to help keep people from ending up in violent situations, ending up homeless, ending up in Rikers Island. So this is the way of the future, to get to mental health challenges early in someone's lives and actually connect people to treatment. Yes?
The police department was supposed to be having training to help de-escalate these situations or use tasers, and in this case, this man was shot. Do you know where that training is, or?
The training has been continuing. You'll remember we honored at the State of the City a wonderful officer who, off duty, saw someone about to jump to their death and commit suicide and had gotten the training and intervened and was able to talk that person down and save their lives. So a number of officers have received the training, but that's continuing throughout this year to reach more and more. The tasers are also being implemented on a wider basis than we have previously. So you'll see more and more ability for officers to call in the tasers as an option. My sense in this situation was things moved very quickly and they didn't have that opportunity, but that will be something that becomes more a part of policing in this city, to give officers that option. Jillian.
Mayor, you'll be testifying to Congress later this month about the Homeland Security cuts proposed by President Obama. When you spoke about these last month, you said that you had hoped to speak to the president about this. Can you give us any sense of how that, if there's been any conversation between you and the White House or how that's going?
No, but I certainly look forward to that soon. And I am certain my testimony will get their attention. So, we look forward to rectifying this issue. I have a lot of respect for the president. I work very well and closely with the White House, but on this one, they've made a mistake and they've got to fix it.
Mr. Mayor, it appears that NJ Transit's heading for a strike. I wonder whether the city is, obviously that could mean more car traffic into the city. Wondering whether the city is preparing contingencies for that, and if so, what you're thinking is.
Yes, we are. Now, as you know, in many of these cases, there's federal mediation. I don't have the update this morning, but my strong hope and belief is that there will be a mediation option that will avert the strike. But yeah, we have to be ready in any instance. So we're certainly going to be ready in terms of NYPD and traffic enforcement's ability to handle more traffic if we have to. But right now, the most important thing is that every effort should be expended to try and stop that strike from happening. Yep.
On a less serious note, this prank city worker played with the Green Book website, the Star Wars logo that was put up there. Have you identified who that was? Will there be a reprimand for the prank?
Of course there'll be a reprimand. It was a silly thing to do, and I imagine we'll be able to figure out who it was, and they shouldn't have done it. Someone needs to get out more often, in my humble opinion. Last call, going once, twice. Thank you, everyone.